I want to welcome everyone here this afternoon. We're going to have a question and answers from the public at the end. We've got a conversation about the Social Security solvency. I want to start off by introducing the panel. As most of you know, District 1 representative in the House of Representatives, Congressman David Schweikert.
And that will probably be the only applause I get, because
I was actually impressed that it was that much. We also have co-chairs of the conservative agenda. First, we have former Congressman Matt Salmon.
Yay.
And down on the end is Jonathan Lines.
Yay.
And the former Arizona State Treasurer, Eileen Klein. Thanks for being here. So as I said at the beginning, this is a conversation about the solvency of Social Security, national debt, the importance of that control, and it would not be a Congressman Schweikert event if it didn't involve slides and a presentation. So we're going to turn it over to the Congressman for a short presentation,
Okay,
if you don't mind doing that now.
I'll try to do some of this very quick. Okay, am I hitting just the... Okay, you tell me which buttons I'm hitting.
Matt, you're right in the middle. Okay, right in the middle.
All right.
How's that?
Screen sharing. Okay, do you see the slide behind me? I'm going to try to do this sort of in a hyper-caffeinated speed way. Do you see the blue areas? That's defense and non-defense discretionary. Most of that is what you think of as government. That's the Park Service, that's the State Department, that's everything else. Every dime of that is borrowed. Every dime a member of Congress right now votes on is borrowed money. Everything else is, you see in the red, I don't get to vote on unless it's a reconciliation budget. But the fact of the matter is, when you start to actually get a sense, which button am I supposed to be hitting?
It's just on the right-hand side.
Okay, well, that's which one I'm hitting. Well, let's see if I can find. You give it a shot.
Okay.
All right, well, someone wants to do it manually. The next slide is to try to make a point, and it's sort of a graphical slide. You want to go ahead and do them? So you've been hearing sort of the political exploitation of trying to fear-mongering, particularly some of the the things that were done yesterday. The dollar amount, that is baseline spending, $86 trillion over the next 10 years. The entire discussion, the maximum side of the reconciliation might reach $2 trillion over 10 years. If any of you in your life couldn't actually start to realize the scale of what we're up against. Next slide. As you start to look at this, this is over the next 10 years. This is where the growth in spending comes from. You're going to notice the three dominant, and they're huge, old age survivor, Social Security, Medicare. When you see other mandatory, that's Medicare. And then you look at interest. Understand, in 15, 18, 20 years, interest has a high likelihood to be the most expensive thing in your government. You are basically an insurance company with an army that the bond market, the bankers, are functionally in charge of your country, or soon to be, because we have to finance. This year we will take $9 trillion to market and bring another $2.3 trillion of virgin, what we call new spending. The scale, remember, we're borrowing about $70,000 every second. So you got to get a sense of the scale. You see on this chart here, one of the points, the only reason I threw that one up is the discussion. You can't touch interest. You know, interest is interest. It's the debt you've sold. You have an obligation for the soundness of the currency and the debt. And you're not allowed to touch Social Security. So you can't even talk about Social Security in a reconciliation budget, even though in 8 years, Social Security Trust Fund is empty. And it's not some conspiracy. We have the baby boomers moving into their earned benefits. And the fact of the matter, I'm going to show you a couple demographic slides here at the end. We have a shortage of young people. How many of you hear about schools around the fastest growing state in America, or one of the fastest growing states in America, closing because we don't have enough children? If you have a pay-as-you-go system and start having a shortage of young people, you have a math problem that becomes very difficult to deal with. So, and I'm not going to make you sit through that one. Look, Okay, this is the older deck. So let's actually, just to understand the expiring tax provisions of TCJA from 2017. For my district, I accept I have a more prosperous district, one of the best educated districts in America. That's the change in your tax bill. Sorry, as I sit here and keep hitting buttons. That's the change. If you live in Congressional District 1 and you're an average income earner, an average family, that's your changes in your taxes in 2026. How many of you have any understanding? So how do I keep this from happening, at the same time not add it to the U.S. debt, but find ways to manage inefficiencies, modernizations, other things, and some things that just need to be cut. They're out of date. Look, I'm going to skip through some of these because I know there may be more conversation here. This is one half, actually maybe the majority of the issue I have to deal with. I chaired the Joint Economic Committee. So I have a handful of PhD economists at work for me. I chair oversight in Ways and Means. My life is trying to understand what's going on in the math, not my feelings, because at some point the math does win. And you need some people, the morality of getting it right and fixing things instead of giving great speeches and then letting it come burning down around us. We have a math problem. We also have a demographic problem. If you live in a country that in 7.5 years, 8 years, according to the Census Bureau, there's other reports out that say we're already there, your country has more deaths than births. So think about that. According to the Census Bureau, in less than 8 years, your country has more deaths than births. And then you've designed pay-as-you-go systems. Anyone see my demographics problem? And I won't make you go through all my demographic slides. But here's the reality, and here's why we need to tell the truth, because it's fixable. Just the scale of it is hard. Look, you wouldn't be in this room unless you're really smart. But would you believe that the majority of the population cannot see 12 zeros in their head? And I'm going to make the moral argument that in 8 years, when the Social Security Trust Fund is empty, and we double senior poverty in America, and the average recipient is taking a 20% cut, is that moral? Well, how many of the political class will get up and talk about it saying there's ways to fix it? But when you have someone say, well, just raise the cap, you know that it covers only 38% of the shortfall, and then in future years it gets less and less. You do realize much of what you hear coming out of people's mouths is mathematically not the truth. This is the scale. This is the next 30 years behind me, and this slide's already a year out of date. We think actually it's several $1 trillion more. But you'll notice one little thing. What we call discretionary spending, it's actually grows, discretionary spending grows slower than tax receipts. But Medicare and Social Security, the earned entitlements, you earn these, and their financing costs consume everything. And I know we always think about ourselves, but you should think about your retirement. You should also think about your kids, your grandkids, maybe my 2.5-year-old. When my 2.5-year-old turns 24, 25, every tax in the United States has to have doubled just to maintain baseline services. It's math. It's not my feelings. It's not Republican or Democrat. It's math. Maybe it's time the public start demanding that those of us who you blessed with a job like this start getting up in front of groups and tell the truth about the math, not our feelings. And look, I have a whole set of presentations I'm not going to put you through on the demographics, but when you look at that chart behind me, you get an understanding that the solutions that may have worked 20, 30, 40 years ago no longer work. Because starting in 1990, we started to roll over in our fertility rates. And we're not the only ones. It's all over the industrialized world. You've got to understand, we're not the only ones. It's also why I will make you an argument that we need to tell the truth about moving to a talent-based immigration system. We should be running around the world stealing every hardworking, smart person who wants to do things and educate them here and send them home. That's insane. Because we're going to have to adopt technology. We're going to have to adopt labor force substitutions, and we're going to have to chase around the world for anyone who wants to contribute. So, look, I'm not going to make you go through the other slides here. You can, so if someone has the magic computer, you can turn it off. And you're an expert at part of this. What are the two incredible things the United States has? We have the reserve currency of the world. What will economists tell you that's even more value than the extraordinary privilege of having the world's reserve currency? We're the country that people want to bring their intellect to, their capital to, their lives to. We got to protect this, and we got to exploit this. And with that, and a whole bunch of not being afraid of doing things better, faster, cheaper, because here's the MedPAC report from 5 days ago. I'm sorry, I've already been reading it and it's already falling apart in me. If you read, this is written not by a bunch of Republicans. These are professionals written under the Biden administration. The numbers will terrify you in here. If you want to protect our brothers and sisters in this country that have needs, make the math work, adopt the technology to change the prices. In this book, if you actually do part of the math, there's an argument in here that says just modernizing Medicare Advantage could be $1 trillion over 10 years in savings and not a single service cut. Read the data, read the facts, embrace it. That's not Republican or Democrat. That's just doing your job of good government.
Give the other panelists a chance to weigh in, but I'd like to start with Mr. Lyons. Give us a perspective of rural Arizona and the implications of what we're seeing here, how it differs from the urban areas, and how it will affect where you live in the rural parts of our state.
Well, first, I appreciate Congressman Schweikert's perspective on this, and certainly agree. However, when it comes to children, I think I've done my part with 11.
You did my part too.
We would have liked to have had more, and I've asked my 10 children for 100 grandchildren. So I feel like I'm doing my part. My new friend Pete told me just moved here from Illinois that he brought with him 10 children. So welcome to Arizona. Thank you for being part of this.
Do you want coffee?
You know, Michael, the last 3 years I've served as the chairman of the Yuma Community Food Bank. And from a frontline perspective, over the last 6 months, we saw in rural Yuma where 25% of our community receives assistance. 25% of Yuma community receives assistance from the food bank on a monthly basis. We saw an increase of 500 to 600 to 700 per month. So this economy is impacting our seniors, and the primarily users of the food bank are our seniors. They're doing whatever they can to scrape by, becoming a senior community. I have people moving to rural areas of Yuma, living in trailer parks from all over the country because they can't afford to live anywhere else. So that's my frontline rural perspective, and again, I'm doing what I can on the children's side.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the correlation. People who makes the statements that homelessness and hunger seem to go hand in hand, but the people going and getting these emergency food boxes at St. Mary's Food Bank, many of them are working people that just aren't able to make ends meet, or people that are retired that are finding with food costs increasing so much, they're not able to bridge that gap until the next check comes in.
And we're serving about 150 to 200 of our active duty military at the same time who can't afford and who cannot make it to the end of the month.
Matt?
I really want to tell Congressman Schweikert how much I appreciate him sharing this information, because nobody out there is talking about it. And you spoken several times on your show about the fact that very, very few people. David is on this like a duck on a June bug. He's always bringing it up, and I appreciate that.
What's a June bug?
Never mind. So back when I was in Congress in 2016, there was one of the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mike Mullen. He was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff under President Bush. And he was also chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff under Obama. But he got a group of bipartisan leaders together, people like Madeleine Albright, Henry Kissinger, Robert Gates, Leon Panetta, Brent Scowcroft, names that we all know. And he said that the single greatest threat to our national security, you think that would be maybe China or Iran? No. The single greatest threat to our national security, according to him, was our national debt. And when you listen to the story that Congressman Schweikert just painted out, most people don't really comprehend that when they talk about the federal budget, about 75% of it is on autopilot, as he just said, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and debt service. Those things are on autopilot, and the debt service is probably, as he said, the fastest growing part of it. And if it goes unchecked, in 10 years, it's going to consume just about everything. And the thought that he put out there, that the trustees for the Board of Trustees for Social Security have said that it goes broke in 10 years. And then the alternative is that people will have a 20% reduction in their benefits. They can't do that. But politicians, when they run, they've been warned about the third rail of American politics, and that's Social Security and Medicare. But when they were established during FDR's time, the average life expectancy for a man was 61. Now it's 81. It's 20 years longer, and David showed you the demographics, but we've got to get back, and that's one of the reasons that we established this entity, this group. We've got to get back to focusing on things that are incredibly important to each and every one of us. And it used to be, I remember when I first got into politics, where you'd have the moderate side of the Republican Party saying, you know, I'm a social liberal or moderate, but I'm a fiscal conservative. Everybody said they were fiscal conservative. Now, you know, we're all over the place, chasing squirrels down holes, and we're not focusing and keeping our eye on the ball. And it's refreshing to have a congressman from our state that is a leader on this, but he's got to have some help. And we've got to be demanding that from our leaders, that they start focusing on this, because it will swallow us up.
Ms. Klein?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation and for having it. I just think it's important. It's been a long time since people have wanted to have the conversation, and it's been a long time since fiscal responsibility has been in vogue. So I hope that today this is the beginning of some larger conversations, and both things are true. This isn't sustainable, and Arizonans need the money. So if you consider the average Social Security check, what is it, maybe $2,000 a month? And for us, we say, well, maybe $2,000 a month. But for many Arizonans, we have a large segment of retirees here, and for them, we're still growing personal income, still relatively low compared to the national average, and so those dollars are extra precious. And when you consider that out of that check, and you'd have to take a Medicare payment out of it, on top of it, it really doesn't leave people with a lot of resource. So it really seems like the sensible thing to do is figure out, what do we do for the current population who's in need? How do we begin to make some of the changes we all know are coming? Every group out there, whether it's the Government Accounting Office or even the Congressional Budget Office, Social Security itself, they've positioned a lot of changes that could be made. None of them is particularly popular, we know. It all comes down to figuring out who's going to pay and whether benefits should be reduced. But I think there's the immediate issue of solving for some of the people today, and then starting to set forward a different path. The notion that we're going to have another generation of young Americans thinking that something is coming to them. I don't think any of them has an expectation Social Security is their retirement plan, but a shocking percentage of Americans have saved zero for their retirement. 50s, a very small percentage has even more than $100,000. Large percentage has saved nothing. So it makes those dollars from Social Security even more precious to them. But I think for the younger generation, they're not counting necessarily on Social Security to be there for them. But what they don't see is an alternative. What's the alternative to Social Security that's going to incent them to be in a different savings program long term? How do we build the culture of savings? Yes, we've got to up productivity, not just get more people in to subsidize a system that's failing, but get more people into the workforce who can be more productive, increase productivity, generate more prosperity, reduce the need for government benefits, and get younger people on a path for savings. When you ask young people why they can't save, young families, cost of childcare, cost of housing. You've got a lot of people in this room who are actively working on those problems. So it kind of has to be a wholesale approach to what we're going to do to get the entire nation on a different path. It can't all, though, be just supposed on what are we going to do just to fix Social Security. That gets into Medicare. But beyond that, what are we going to do to completely revamp for the future? I think we've got the stars aligned politically right now. If the Republicans can't make an opportunity out of this moment, shame on them. They've got a complete alignment of what they need to be able to do things to get them done. We've got smart leaders here who are willing to make courageous decisions based on facts. And so I do think we need to rally and start to explore what are those multiple pathways, not just to solve today's problems, but to figure out how we're going to set up something different for the United States of America for the next generation.
And this may be a little bit of a twist on this topic, but I don't think so. Your favorite word to use is math.
Yeah.
Let me ask.
You asked the question before I go rambling.
Let me ask. Is this a part of our education system as well? You're talking about solutions. Is this part of when we're educating people that it's back to the basics of teaching them the fundamentals of saving at an earlier age?
I got to back up everyone.
Okay.
Okay. All right, and I'm not going to make any friends here. If you live in my congressional district, so just up a little bit, yes, you are a fine constituent. If you don't make 27% more today than you did 4 years ago, you are poor. You want to understand why people are stressed out of their minds? How many of you, you're doing okay? You've had your wages go up, but they didn't go up as fast as your rent or other things. How many people right now with the pop in mortgage rates, when you start seeing 30 years hovering closer to 7% than a couple of years ago being closer to 3%. The fact of the matter is what Mr. Lyons spoke about, which is, I'm sorry, we almost need 2 hours on a whiteboard to do this intellectually honest. The 4 years of inflationary cycle will brutalize many people. We also have to now deal with another reality. Because of, in our marketplace, how much was that inflation driven by rents? We're seeing some data that we may very soon be looking at doubling baby boomer homelessness in our community because they can't afford rents. Can you imagine 8 years from now if there's a 20% cut in Social Security checks? We need to make the argument, stop being terrified. And I was part of a group that we thought we had a bipartisan secret meetings, presentation of the White House, and then when President Biden got up behind the mic, he knifed us. Instead of saying, I don't like this, but it's moral, you're working on it, it became a better, because they care, we have people out there, political consultants, that care so much more about winning the next election than saving populations. On savings rates, wage rates, I don't believe you abandon the social safety net. I believe you have to deal with some math realities, and there's one, should someone like myself whose life has been pretty kind to. Do you make some of those things more progressive for someone like me? But when we were working on
social means test?
No, it's more than that. It's because it has to do also with the formula of certain assets held, contributions, 40 quarters. There's a whole bunch of anomalies in the current Social Security formula that weren't designed. That's one part of it. So you have protecting those moving into their retirement, but you got the other side. How do we get wages up? How do we get purchasing power up? How do we get it so folks can actually afford to live? And there's a dozen things you have to do. The availability to land to build the next set of homes. Well, how much federal land do we have wrapped around this county that should be in productive capacity? The adoption of technology. How much healthcare? I mean, should actually the anomalies in healthcare, should we still be delivering so many services as if it was the 1990s? And there's my problem. We have about 100 ideas, and you need almost all of them to interact with each other to make it work. And trying to get in front of the American people and my fellow colleagues in Congress, where they have one good idea and they're going to fight for that, which is wonderful, but they don't appreciate the interaction. They all have to work together. Look, if this were simple, it'd already be done. But stop thinking there's simple solutions for complex problems. It turns out you're going to need complex solutions for complex problems. It's doable. I just don't know if it's doable in an environment where so many people believe things that just aren't true, and the political class on a daily lies to you and tells you things that just mathematically aren't true. But damn it, it's great politics.
Congressman Schweikert, you and I have had conversations in the past about this.
You and I have known each other most of our lives, so yeah, we've had a few conversations.
We've had a few conversations. But in one of those conversations, you were talking about technology as one of the solutions.
Well, can we do just a quick thought experiment that happens to be real? We actually have one of our economists trying to model it, so we don't have the numbers all vetted yet. We're actually trying to mine the CMS data. How many of you have ever had an X-ray, an ultrasound, or an MRI? Yeah. Okay. How many of you, a couple weeks later, went to some other place, you're going to have your surgery, a different doctor's, and you had another one? We actually have some data that says it could be as high as $25 billion a year, meaning $250 billion over 10 years of duplicative scans. What if when you get that MRI, we just attach it to this thing? And it's portable with you. Now, did that cut a service?
Sorry, I don't understand.
Okay, yes, I know no one understands. That was actually planned.
That couldn't have been any more perfect.
But my point I'm trying to go is, now what happens when you line up dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of these sorts of things and say, here's how we're going to modernize and protect our brothers and sisters, because if we don't do it, we will hit a wall, and it will become the cuts and the uncomfortable things. But it turns out, the moment we started talking about this and we started showing the charts of the data we collected, guess who showed up in my office? Come on, you're all smart. Who showed up? AARP. No, actually, even better than that, a bunch of lobbyists saying, David, you don't understand. Those duplicative scans are our profit model. The inefficiencies, the bordering on corruption, is our profit model. So you got to understand, there are no free options. If you do the right and moral thing, how many advocates show up in our offices screaming, David, I want you to modernize. Yeah, it's going to maybe put my little business out of business because now I have to compete with technology, but it's the right and moral thing to do, and we're going to make people healthier. Look, okay, I'm going to shut up after this one, I promise. Did I mention I've had a lot of coffee? And this one, it's like playing with kerosene and matches. Joint Economic Committee a year ago did a major report. It took us an incredible amount of time to do the data. What's the single biggest contributor to expenses for your federal government? But it also one of the biggest societal effects. So obesity in America.
And diabetes?
Well, diabetes is 33% of all health care, 31% of all Medicare. But Milken, and it's a few years out of date, estimated that 47% of all U.S. health care was related to obesity. How about if a morality of helping our brothers and sisters through how we do agricultural support, how we do nutrition support, how we deliver health care, how you build, maybe turn some of these things upside down so the providers are incentivized to help our brothers and sisters be healthier. as a path to cut the price of delivering healthcare services. Is that cuts? Is that immoral? I'm going to argue, and I don't know why that's not bipartisan. We're not all screaming from the same hymnal. Or is it singing from the same hymnal? I'm going to stick with screaming. I'm Catholic. We don't, we hire professionals to interpret for us.
Well, when I sing, it sounds like I'm screaming, so.
That's actually a really funny joke. But it's an interesting discussion. If 9.1 trillion over the next 10 years is the additional cost of delivering health care and the cost to the economy from obesity, you start to see there are actual solutions. The problem is talking about them is basically, I promise you, in the 20 minutes I've been moving my mouth, I've already written a half a dozen attack ads for the left. And that should break all of our hearts. Because did anything I say I can prove every dime of it mathematically, I can reference it, I can footnote it. But once again, we live in a world where we're pushing your dopamine receptor, not your intellect. And how do you fix complex problems in a world where, I want a good tweet, I'm sorry, but you're in a profession, you have some of your brothers on the air that say things that are not about the truth, they're about ratings.
But there are a lot of people that want, when you mentioned earlier solutions, and I have a list here of some of the possible solutions, specifically with Social Security. I'd love to get comments from everyone. I'm going to name a few. You can give us yes or no's, but do they all work together?
But the problem is, I'm sorry, that's an intellectually vacuous way, and you're my friend, to do it. You almost need a whiteboard, you need a scoring system, you need to know which year you're doing it because they have different effects. The different participations of even staying in the labor force, and we had about 24 of them. And it turns out if you did this one, it changed this one. It's more complicated than just ...
Right, but if you're going to convince the electorate that this needs to happen, and you get
the
people on board.
The first trick is having the electorate understand no one stole your Social Security money. The average American couple will get about a $72,000 spiff over what they paid it. Medicare is my crisis. The average person will get 3, 4, 5 times more on healthcare spending than they put in. That's my primary driver.
So do you believe then fixing that Medicare, Medicaid problem, if people are going to live longer, is it going to compound the Social Security problem?
No, it turns out if you could create an incentive saying if you want to continue to work, bless you. If you want to retire, bless you. But at some point, remember, that's not actually what's really happening. I think this is the 7th year in a row, or at least last year, my date is probably a year out of date, prime age males were dying younger. You got to deal with the reality. So we keep talking. So those who get older, their life expectancy, but a bunch of our prime age males, I think it's our 7th year in a row they're dying younger. We had 390,000 Americans die of fentanyl over 6 years. Well, there's a fentanyl vaccine coming out, lasts for 6 months a year. Should we start thinking about the morality of helping people be able to make it through rehab instead of recidivism? But that's part of our list of the 100 things you have to do that all interact.
So what are the keys? The information that people are coming for is, can you give us some of these solutions that have to work
number
together?
Number one solution, you guys, instead of me just rambling, because you have all lived this, you need a public that knows the truth. And you actually need a Democrat Party that can work through their rage and spend a little bit of time saying, we're going to do the morality. We're going to save the Republic, and we're going to save the future. The problem is everyone votes on their today and not their tomorrow. And it wasn't only a couple decades ago. You understand, whenever someone, whether you were on the left or the right, you proposed an idea, you showed up with a pay for it. Something happened in the last 15, 20 years where they stopped doing that. Because everything's free, it's candy. In a weird way, is it the political class, or does the political class have to start telling the truth, and the culture has to understand what we're up against?
Mike, one of the problems is that you know, as we're focusing all of our attention on, in the media, on Doge and who's getting laid off and this and that, the problem is, you can lay off just about everybody and we're still gonna have the problem. We're not talking about the things that will really change this. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
77,000 folks who've accepted early retirement would be 2.5% of the workforce. There's 3 million federal employees.
I'm wondering, you know, why do we have to perpetuate the same system? You brought up great points about Medicare. A lot of the healthcare costs comes from when people are near the end of their life.
Yeah.
And so we expect that. But why do we force everyone into Medicare? Why do we have that as the system? Having everybody have health insurance, and I know this gets into the Affordable Care Act, but the bottom line is that the government's basically said, this is the only way it's going to be done. It's going to be done our way, and it's going to be built off a model that is 50 to 70 years old. Your state, the good news is, I think the whole country can learn a lot from Arizona.
From access.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We went and beyond. So we think about the Great Recession, and you know, I can tell you I was one who had the privilege of running one of the big rooms on the cleanup crew after the Great Recession to get our state turned around. We cut taxes. We worked on business attraction. We worked on education policies so that opportunity was there for the people who could work here. We grew this economy. We reduced the requirements, that we reduced the need that people had for state services. The federal government came in right after that. We expanded all of the health care. All of the ideas that Arizona had practically seemed like they were rejected. We decided that we know it works to pay people to lose weight. We're not going to let you do that, Arizona. Why? We need to take Arizona's example and begin to use that as a model across the country. We have all of the policies in place that we know are working, they're proven, they are based on private sector innovation, they increase productivity, they've attracted phenomenal capital investment in this state. And so what can we do to get those ideas to the forefront? Yes, we want to talk about all the mechanics of what has to be done in solving the federal budget problem, but ultimately for the long-term vitality, how can we work on those big macro issues, and how can this state be set free on policy that's actually going to reduce costs and improve the quality and length of people's lives? I think that's really where, you know, yes, we want to support you in solving some of these immediate problems, but how can we invigorate you to take Arizona's example to the rest of this country?
One of the things that Congressman Schweikert talked about, and it is something that if you pay a lot of attention to the medical community and the medical research community, we've been hearing it for a long time, but the impacts on our society of obesity, from heart disease to cancer, to dealing with diabetes, and on and on and on. And there are folks that live very unhealthy lifestyles. We know certain things that cause illness. We know that tobacco causes illness. We know that alcohol causes illness. We know that, you know, eating too much sweets causes certain kinds of illness, or super cheese Doritos. And I can go on and on. But that's one of the things actually Kennedy is talking about that I applaud him on, about building a healthier America, because that's going to have an impact on our bottom line too. But, you know, in the insurance world, if you get in car accidents or speeding tickets or drive in an unsafe way, you pay higher premiums. But if you're stupid in the way you treat your body, you pay the same premiums as everybody else.
Yeah, I see the incentives differently. I think you flip it completely opposite. Look, let's use the ACA model. And you and I have actually, if you remember, you and I had dove into this conversation. You have 3 age tiers, and smoking is a penalty. So you have functionally 4 tiers. What would happen if you allowed the ACA to actually have a model where you can have rewards? We're going to reward you for engaging in certain lifestyle improvements, and working
So
with
you get a discount.
Yeah, but why not?
Yeah.
And And look, I know this sounds insane, but it's partially, I beg people to try to open your mind and think. In the last 25 years, what was the greatest success we had for young people going out and exercising, getting healthier? Believe it or not, statistically, it was Pokemon Go. And you go, huh? It was a gamification of something? Well, there's models out there that everything from providing nutrition support to helping someone in their lifestyle and those things. We all walk around, we know in Arizona, even down to, you may not be running around with a new iPhone, but you have a smartphone because that's your access to the world. Think about the ability to use that technology, human incentives, to help our brothers and sisters be healthier, live longer, and the value that has for the relief of the pressure on the entire society to pay for these things. But the moment we do that, you have to accept you're challenging certain bureaucracies and business models that actually rely on a lot of our brothers and sisters not becoming healthier.
Right.
But that's just one part of it. Look, I only do that as one example. There's other things of the substitution of technology and bureaucracies and those things to do things better, faster, cheaper, answer the phones, access to your information. There's hope. It just requires a really ginormous whiteboard and an open mind.
Congressman Schweikert, as I walked in this morning, I had a call from a legislator who's a Democrat who asked me specifically to share with him the truth regarding one of the bills and how it affected the county level. And he had been asked to change his vote. The projection that was given to him was a 3 to 5 year projection, and I asked if he had seen a 10 to 15 year projection and what that passed along cost would do to the counties. And that's something intellectually and honestly with math that's just missing in the entire process. So how do you compel, even at the lower levels, as a county supervisor, I have to have a balanced budget. I can't sit there and just tell my constituents the X amount that I represent in my district, I'm going to raise your taxes simply because we're bad at math. And yet at the state legislature, we still see that, and it's ongoing, and there's no honesty when it comes to some of these bills that are being put forward. And again, it's the special interest, right?
Problem is, we're all sort of the special interests.
Right. So how do you compel honesty in the math? Except for a big whiteboard.
Yeah, look,
Right?
and I'm incredibly blessed. I represent a district of a lot of really smart people. They may not be exactly where I am intellectually or ideologically, but they tolerate me. And there's something happening in the country where you do these presentations and they end up on YouTube and you get 1 million people looking at it. That there's someone who wants to be treated like an adult, but it's a hard thing. I mean, think about our local news media and those things where you're trying to get little clips, and so often the idiot. Our job is, how do you say something that's impactful, or do you go something it's a good dopamine hit? I do ask you though to take into consideration the majority of the state budget, the money they get to spend, comes from where? The federal government. So we borrow money to send it to the state, who sends it to you. Much of that cash you get, matter of fact, if it's from the discretionary, every dime of it's borrowed.
Right.
And that's hard for people to understand. Is it, at some point, is it rational for the federal government to be basically the big borrowing engine? Last fiscal year, for every dollar the United States took in tax receipts, we spent $1.39. Every dollar in, we spent $1.39. That should send shivers.
All right, I want to talk to you about bills, because as a county, I depend upon payment in lieu of taxes. So you mentioned the federal ownership of land here in Arizona. How do we challenge that model going forward?
The PILT subsidy, as you know, has already been dialed back.
Right.
There is an argument that if you care about housing availability, start looking at the map of your county particularly, but even here, have any of you ever really stared at a Maricopa County map and said, here's my urban area, and here's Bureau of Reclamation land, here's Forest Service land, here's all the different layers of government land that are right, and we create this leapfrog. So, oh, we need to leap over this. We're going to spend all the sewer line, utilities, extend the traffic. The way the federal government says we have a growing urban area, we know we need housing stock, particularly in a place like Arizona where in this county, don't we get about 300 new people a day? How do I create a rational process saying, in some ways, state trust land, we need it. It belongs. Yes, those are resources for the school, but it also makes a difference in the ability to have family formation, capital growth, because you own a house, you build your retirement, you build wealth. And it turns out some just land policy even affects those cascades. Back to the unified theory. Could some of that money also then become the substitute for the fact that in a state like Arizona, why is our tax system so difficult here? Because we own so little of our land. And then that land that actually has access to water. Many other states, they have this huge property tax base. We really don't. So we have to actually sort of work through the uniqueness of being in a state where the government owns the vast majority of our land resources.
Two quick questions, and then we're going to open it up for public comments and questions. First is, can you talk about the importance of finally passing a budget and not just these continuing resolutions? Can you talk about that for a moment?
We should pass a budget, not continuing resolutions.
Can you explain? All right, then I'll ask the next
How
question.
long's it been?
Yeah, it's been forever, because if you need 60 votes in the Senate and you have a world, look what's happening to Chuck Schumer right now. The beatings he's taking from the left for agreeing to a continuing resolution. Mm-hmm. Even though if this were 6 months ago, there would have been outrage on the discussion of a shutdown. Mm-hmm. It turns out we have situational politics, situational ethics. In much of our politics today, it's whoever we can beat down. That's where our heads are at. The budget process is absolutely broken, but it's also broken in a way where the ability to grind through and understand outliers. Let's see if I can make this make sense. If I came to all of you and said, I need your help. I need to find where we have waste and fraud and just dumb things. Do you hire a bunch of lawyers? Do you hire a bunch of accountants? Or do you hire the 23-year-old dropout from MIT who bathes only occasionally, but can go up and down data sets and see things in hours that would take everyone else years to get to? The United States government has 5 major databases. None of them talk to each other. That's one of the ways the scammers take advantage of you and your government, because I have information here, so I go over to SBA, well, they have a one that they don't talk to each other. The fact of the matter is you live in a time where you're walking around with a supercomputer in your pocket. Why can't your government get the data to just talk to each other and at least stop some of the scamming of our society? You're doing budgets. The inability to grind through them and say, what's really going on in this? That's why I have bills that, this is the 6th year in a row, I've been trying to do an AI audit of the Pentagon. We're 8 years now, the Pentagon has not been able to be audited. It's unauditable. But it turns out there's AI packages that would just crawl through and find out how many trucks we own. We don't know. Is that Republican or Democrat? It's just technology to do the job the right way. And yet the public employee unions hate it. And I can't get my head around why those would hate the very things that say, we're just trying to figure out how to do the job well.
Mike, I just want to throw in, and then maybe we can put it out some questions, but I served 2 different stints in Congress, and during my first stint, where we actually had a balanced budget 3 years in a row, we were passing the 12 appropriation bills. And that's one of the reasons I think that we got away from scrutinizing to the degree that needs to be done. It's called regular order. It's actually going into the budget and looking at it with more of a fine-tooth comb to determine what's obsolete, what needs help, what needs more funding, what needs to be zeroed out. And when I came back in 2013, that was all out the door, and everything was done by a continuing resolution, which is nothing more than no scrutiny almost, 0. And you have maybe 6 or 7 members of leadership that go into a room instead of all members of Congress looking at the budget. They go into a room and they come up with a number and they shove it down everybody's throats. And that's what a continuing resolution is. And the other alternative is a big ugly omnibus where they just take everything and stick it into one big ugly funding bill and kick the can down the road. But it's one of the reasons financially that, we're, at least with discretionary spending, that we're in the place that we're in, that so much money is being wasted because it's not being looked at.
So that leads me to the last question. Mr. Lyons brought it up earlier, and this is for everybody if you want to weigh in, especially being the treasurer as you were. The state of Arizona, with a pretty liberal governor and 2 pretty conservative leaders in the legislature, sit down and balance the budget, and they get it done fairly quickly because they're required to by law. Let's talk about a balanced budget amendment here in the United States. There are a lot of states that are getting on board with that. What do you think of that idea? Is it possible to pass? And if it does, would that help fix a lot of these problems if you were required to, your colleagues had to sit down with you and balance that budget?
Let Lyons go first.
Okay.
I'm all for it. That's required. How many people are going to be on board for that, though? How are you going to get it codified into law?
Don't you think the citizens would be?
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. Do we put it on a national ballot? How much opposition will we see from that?
We need to work in that direction. It's a sad state of affairs that we even have to say that we have to have an amendment to get ourselves to balance our budget, knowing it is a national security risk. Even if it's balanced on a cash basis, one moment in time on one day, that will move us so far. And we probably need some debt reform to go along with it about what we're allowed to take that out for and who we're selling it to.
Yes.
And when you talk about the model, if you look in Maricopa County, major county, growing county, they don't have any debt, they own their buildings, they balance their budget, they've moderated property taxes over the last few years so that our taxes weren't going up as property values were. They cut their budget by 10% and they're doing this at the county level. So they've shown that it can be done, but shouldn't it be a requirement?
I supported the balanced budget amendment. You can get it through the House. You still probably can today. The problem's the Senate. And if it got out of the House and Senate and it went to the states, I believe 38 states would ratify. But the Senate's the problem.
I emotionally love a balanced budget amendment, have supported it. The math is so difficult now because of our demographics. I don't think we're all being completely honest with each other. This year, the federal government will spend $7.2 trillion and will take in 5. So think about the second slide I showed you. You remember the stack of coins saying over the next 10 years we're going to spend 86 trillion and all we're trying to do is cut 2 trillion, and you think of just the bedwetting and the grinding of teeth and the crying on 2 trillion of changes on 86 trillion. What happens when it's functionally almost 25% of all spending has to either come in higher taxes or cuts? So if you're going to do a balanced budget amendment, you almost would have to design it in a way where it had enough time to do something demographically, but this is the math, we have our brothers and sisters, 76 million of us who are baby boomers. You know, the timing to work through so you had a more normalized population demographics. It's math. And it's great saying I'm for a balanced budget amendment, and then you start to show people saying we would have to go to a value-added tax like Europe almost the next day. So we'd go from 17, 18% of the entire economy coming in federal taxes to somewhere around 24 to 26% of the entire economy coming in. And a VAT tax is functionally a sales tax. And it will go, the majority of it is in the working middle class. That's where VAT taxes, that's how Europe finances itself. It's actually, remember, when it comes to the wealthy, we have the most progressive tax system in the industrialized countries, by far, because we don't use a value-added tax. You can make the numbers work. You just have to understand the distributional effects of what's going to happen. Because at one moment, we're talking about our brothers and sisters in the middle class being able to get their wages up. On the next set, you just talked about raising their taxes by about, actually, for many of them, you know, what is it? A third of American workers pay no federal income tax at all. They pay payroll taxes. It would be a dramatic tax hike. So there's your balance. Most of my economists actually say we need to get down to 3%, no more than 3% of the economy being borrowed in a year. That's considered stable. This year we're going to borrow 7.25%. Last factoid, and sorry, I did mention before I had a lot of coffee. If you, and the Manhattan Institute has a great article on this, making fun of both Republicans and Democrats. If you take every Democrat tax proposal that's been scored, you know, so it's all of them, and do the economic effects, you get about 1.5% of the economy. Almost every cut, reduction in spending, those things that's been scored on the Republican side, it's about 1% of the economy. So I got 2.5%. I just mentioned we're going to borrow 7.25% this year, and in 10 years, it's 9.2% of the entire economy. So the folks that run around saying, just tax these people more, or just cut, we can cut our way. They're not telling you the truth of what's going on. It's actually a lot harder. There's a way to do it. Did I mention the really ginormous whiteboard that you got to put it all on, and you got to make it work together? We need to really raise our intellects and take this challenge on. Look, we're Americans. We're blessed. We live better than almost anyone in the world. We can fix this. But one of my smartest economists says we have only 3 to 4 years, and then we start a debt cycle. Because remember, in 2034, 2035, just the interest payment will be over $2 trillion. You start a cycle where you're chasing yourself, and that's the death spiral.
I'm going to open it up for questions. I don't know if I'm going to have some help in picking who's going to ask the questions. If we can keep it, you can help determine who it is. Direct your question. Tell us who you're asking the question of, and let's start. Anybody out there got some questions? Feel free. Yes, ma'am.
Congressman, I've heard you speak about the cost of health care and what that does to the national debt so many times. In our country right now, Medicaid uses such a faulty formula in prescription reimbursements through pharmacy benefit managers, which have a $500 million annual revenue. They use things like clawbacks and price spreading to artificially increase the price to the consumer. Why don't we take that role back, cut out that middleman, and take control of the formulary where some of the issues we know, like obesity and diabetes, can be treated with drugs that are readily available but aren't allowed on the formularies?
It turns out some of the research actually is in here in the MedPAC report on PBMs and their costs. It's not actually what sometimes we say. There are solutions. You already have a really interesting experiment that's been going on now for a couple of years. Are you familiar with Civica RX?
Not really.
Please grab your phone, look it up. California Medicaid system, a number of private insurance companies, a number of hospital systems. Actually, it's a co-op. They decided saying, screw it, we don't like the price of this insulin, we don't like the price of these drugs. Remember, the vast majority of drugs are off patent. They make their own. And their insulin, the 3 generic insulins, come in cheaper than the government subsidized price. The fact of the matter is, I believe sort of in the chaos theory. I want manufacturers to be able to sell directly. I want PBMs to go into manufacturing. I want co-ops to come together and say we have a shortage. There's these new 3D printers that can even do small molecule drugs. Now there's a third the size of this room. Get our hospital systems together and say, screw it, we have a shortage on this, we're just going to print our own. The fact of the matter is you live in the time of technology miracles, and our great sin in healthcare is we design silos. You do drugs. You purchase it. You negotiate the price. You deliver it. These injections can only be done in the hospital because we get extra money for it, but you could do it in a surgery center or the doctor's office. It turns out the adoption of technology and breaking down the silos, you can have a revolution in the costs. The problem is, forgive my language, that pisses off everyone. Because now, I don't like them making a profit, but I want it for myself. And our theory, and we've been working on this in legislation, we want to break down the barriers and make everyone compete against everyone.
Great question. Who's next? Anyone?
Mike, I was just going to comment that one of the other things that's become really popular with the other side of the aisle is capping prescription costs. The problem with that is if you cap prescription costs, no prescriptions are ever, we won't get any new prescriptions because only 1 out of 10? Well, 1 out of 100 ever even make it to market?
What we saw in the total drug spend was it was just a cost shift. They just shifted it to other pharmaceuticals.
Right. But the problem is innovation dries up in this country. I've done a lot of work with people with rare diseases, with orphan drugs. And literally, if you start putting price caps on everything, orphan drugs will go away. And those people will be helpless. So there's so many sides to everything, like David said.
If you get a chance, if you're really interested in the subject area, grab some of our literature and our legislation on changing the use of technology, the use of AI, these things to help the FDA bring disruption to market much faster. It's complex. I typically don't talk about it in public because there's like 12 people that really appreciate it. But remember, last year, we had whole new categories of antibiotics discovered by AI. And the researchers said it would be 20, 30 years for humans to do it. But now we need to modernize the government side of how we do efficacy trials and get them to market faster. And it turns out that turn speed is one of the ways you crash the price.
Is there a way to incentivize private industry? I talked to the head of Mayo not too long ago with the $2 billion in investment, and one of the things he talked about with AI was a new tool that when they diagnose cancer, that there is an AI model that they're using now because it was taking them 17 hours to do a pathway for treatment. With this AI tool, it's only 1 hour. And they're taking the technology as they develop it and they're making it available to every healthcare provider out there and not keeping it for themselves.
And it shouldn't require government subsidies. The fact that it's better, faster, cheaper should be the classic American market model of, oh, there's something that's better, faster, cheaper, grab it. And the problem is, lined up in my office in DC will people that say, hey, give us some money for that. And it turns out every time we do that, we end up creating another silo because this is the one that's subsidized, and the next disruption, well, I can't compete with the subsidized one.
Okay.
Mike, I read the most fascinating story a while back about a woman that was going through some really serious healthcare concerns, and she'd been bounced around from one specialist to another, to another, to another, and they tried all kinds of different therapies and modalities, and nothing was working. And so finally, out of frustration, she took all this information that had been gleaned from all these specialists and everything, and she inputted it into ChatGPT, and she came up with an answer and took it to the specialist, and the guy said, why didn't I think of that?
Yeah.
And they solved her problem. They put her on the road to recovery, to health. And she solved it herself by going to AI. It was fascinating.
Medical knowledge doubles every 72 days. You need to think about that. That
The
is.
beautiful woman in the middle has a question.
Oh. We have to add, sir.
So I heard several times talk about raising wages, and that's really hard for businesses, and when businesses do that, they have to let people go. So, but during the campaign cycle, we heard a lot about reducing costs. So that's still, I think, would be the focus in what we want to talk about, and that's many of the things that you've talked about here, but yet I've heard raising wages several times, and so I need.
When you hear the word, when government doesn't raise wages,
Right.
when you actually have artificial floors, it just gets moved into the costs, and so your wage may have gone up, but your cost went up. You ended up, so it's actually, in economic speak, it's purchasing power. You actually have the example in 2018, 19, and 20. If you actually look at the charts, it was a miracle, almost very, very little inflation and purchasing power. It was also the fastest closure of income inequality in modern America, in modern economics. But you do that, but wages go up because there's demand for the labor.
So we should talk about it in purchasing power and not.
Yeah, purchasing power is the price, but no one knows what the hell you're talking about. And there's other really uncomfortable things, and this will come across very partisan, and it's not really meant to be, it's math. What happened in the previous 4 years of populations that came into the country, we're already seeing a suppression of the wage growth and wages of the working poor. People that sell their labor, because now they're competing against so many other people that have similar skill sets. And there's a data model out there that says for the working poor, your wages are going to stay flat for maybe another decade. But we have examples where we have succeeded in the last 10, 15 years where we've crushed working people and we've inflated assets. So those of us that have assets, we get wealthier. People that don't have houses and those things get poorer, creating the income inequality. And other times where the value of people's labor, because it's so needed in the economy, goes up. And that's actually, prosperity is moral. You just got to get your tax policy, your regulatory policy, and immigration policies correct to maximize that.
All right, I apologize. We've gone about 10 minutes over. If anybody's got one last question, we'll take it. If not, we're going to close it out because we were supposed to be done at 2 and it's almost 10 after. Anybody else?
Hey, thank you for tolerating me. I know some of this gets a little geeky, but you wouldn't have been in this room if you weren't smart. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you all.
How's the looming tax debate, how it resolves itself, going to impact Medicare?
It matters. What would happen if you took Medicare Advantage and turned it into a true capitated program? You could save $1 trillion over 10, and people would get healthier. Or do you just do the intellectually lazy and just cut things? Thank you.
I'm going to interview him. I think he's going to do a quick gaggle.
Here's an animation of what the capsule looks like. We've got the pressurized section, the capsule on the top, and the trunk or the unpressurized section on the bottom. That's where those solar panels that we manufacture in-house are located, soaking up the energy from the sun and turning it into power.